I know that we invited you to come for champagne, and the champagne is ready. And if you'd like to come back, go on back and get a glass and sit down and relax, and then we'll get started. I've been asked frequently, why would a husband choose to write the life story of his wife? Well, it all starts with what's in this bag.
Letters.
These are letters that Annie and I exchanged over a 4-year period. There are over 1,000 of them.
Wow.
And they have followed us all across the country in every house we've ever lived in. I guess I have to admit there were a couple of romantics. One day about 10 years ago, we decided to reread these letters. And it was really a wonderful experience. It reminded us of a lot of things, that, some of which we had forgotten, but a lot of which we will never forget. And at the end of that experience, Annie turned to me and she said, "You know, I think we've got a story here. Why don't you write it?" Well, it took a while, but she finally convinced me that it was a project worth undertaking. So we took off. We needed to figure out how the story could be written by someone other than she. Annie loves to talk, as I think you all know, but she's not a writer. So I felt the only way to make the story convincing would be to write in the first person. And for a man to do that, to write a story of a woman, is a real challenge, because you know, right away we're up against this Mars-Venus thing. And I realized that if it was going to be effective, I would have to share virtually every line that I wrote with her to make sure that I was on track. And this is what we did. We spent many, many hours discussing what had been written, making the changes, the additions, corrections, or lots of corrections, in order to get Annie's thoughts and feelings into the book. And I hope we've succeeded in doing that. When we started out our married life, I suspect, as many of you were, we were poor as church mice. We lived in a succession of apartments in the poorer neighborhoods of Philadelphia. And finally, after Annie started her job as a visiting nurse, we had enough money that we could move into a decent neighborhood. And long about then, our first child arrived. Annie had to quit her job. And then we realized, I should say Annie realized, that as long as we continued to pay rent, we were never going to be able to save enough money to buy a house. And every other couple wants to do that. So she got busy and found out there was a government housing project that we could move into, where the rent would be about 1/3 of what we were paying. So I wasn't really pleased about the idea of living in a government housing project, but she persuaded me that this was the thing to do, so off we went. We'd been there a few months when one day at the dinner table, she handed me a package. "What's this?" "Oh, we're going to paint our car." We had bought a 37 Chevy with 200,000 miles on it. And it was black and not very exciting. And it needed a paint job. And she decided that we were going to paint it. She got this package from Sears and Roebuck catalog. And she promised me that we'd work together on it. Well, I wasn't very excited about it, but I've learned that it's better to go along than to create problems.
Yes, dear.
So bright and early Saturday morning, we started out to paint our car. And the first job is a lot of preparation, a lot of wet and dry sandpaper. And about 10:30 that morning, suddenly we became I. Annie had to go in and take care of the baby. Well, I didn't see much of Annie for the rest of that day. When I showed on, I didn't get the preparation finished. Sunday came around, Sunday morning, I'm back working hard. My golly, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm just about finished with the preparation. And by this time, it's getting cold. Well, can you imagine what it was like to try to put this paint on a cold surface? And to make it worse, it was a battleship gray. And that was really not a very exciting color. And the darn thing was full of lumps. So that's the way it went. But this is the kind of thing that I learned to live with. I want to give you a little idea of the character of this lady. She completed a very vigorous academic program in order to win her Bachelor of Science degree, her nurse's certificate, and her public health certificate. College was not easy for Annie. She has a learning disability, and she had to work twice as hard as her classmates. It was a very rigorous program with all the pre-medical sciences, and she completed it satisfactorily and started her clinical service at the first hospital. And about the middle of August of that summer, she contracted mononucleosis and hepatitis and was hospitalized for 5 weeks. It was a very serious illness. None of her classmates were allowed to visit her, and it made it doubly hard because she was in effect isolated. At the end of this period, the director of the program came to her and said, because you've missed so much of your practical floor duty experience, we're going to have to ask you to drop out of the program. Oh no, she said. I worked too hard to get here. I'm not going to drop out. You've got to find a way to make it possible for me to stay. So the director and her assistant agreed to provide the tutoring that she needed so she could finish it. Well, she came out of the hospital, and I'd like to ask her to tell you what happened to her after she got out of the hospital.
Well, Doug was supporting me all this time, but I was getting suspicious because he was working in a very fancy resort in the Adirondacks. And he was head waiter, and he had all these beautiful college girls around him. But he was still writing me letters and saying, you know, everything's just fine. But I thought, this doesn't sound like Doug, you know. And so his parents knew the things that he was putting on a big line with me. But as it turned out, so after I had a long convalescence after I finally got out of the hospital, and so he finally came up to me and said, you know, I'm awful sorry, but he said, I have met another girl. I have another girlfriend. But he said, I still like you too, but I was just wondering if it would be all right if I just dated the two of you. But I was so crazy about him, and I said, well, and he said, then I'll decide which one I want. So my father heard this, and he had, I won't repeat what he said about his future son-in-law, and he got a hold of me and he said, "You're not gonna have a thing to do with that so-and-so. You're return all the rings and pennants and all the letters, and you're never gonna see him again." Oh, I said, "You can't do that. I have to stick with you." And he said, "No," he said, "you listen to me, and if it's meant to be, you'll get him back." Well, I was just heartbroken, but my dear grandmother took me down to Cape May, to a beautiful resort, and I cried my eyes out, and I said, "All right, I'll do it." So I did. And I gave him the cold shoulder for a while, but I was just furious at him. Now, if you want to know what happened after that, you'll have to read the book.
Well, getting back to the living in the government housing project, we were able to save enough money to buy our first house. There was a little 3-bedroom ranch house in a town called Hatboro, Pennsylvania. And it had a back door out of the kitchen that opened on to some stairs that went down to the hillside. And Annie said, "You know, I like this back door, but I would really like to have a porch where I could put the baby carriage out." And by this time, she's getting into the baby business. We already had one and another one on the way, and I could tell that more were planned. I like to do a lot of things, but I'm no carpenter. You know, the time that I tried to hang the storm door on our front door, I screwed it up so badly we had to jump the door, buy a new one, and hire somebody to hang the door. So this is not for me. Well, I thought that project had gone away, but I was out mowing the lawn a few weeks later, and I see this beat-up old pickup truck come down the street, and it's loaded with old lumber. I said, "I wonder what that is." And it pulled into our driveway. Uh-oh, I said, "I'm in trouble." Annie's right behind the truck. She hops out, she said, "Isn't this great? I was able to buy all this lumber. They were tearing down this porch, and I talked the guys into selling it to me, and you can rebuild and make me a nice porch." Well, a couple of guys from my job joined in and helped me, and with a case of beer, we did get Annie the back porch. We moved into our next house by this time, which was a typical Levittown development with cookie cutter type of houses. The typical three-story split level, if you remember those. Everybody had a picture window. Everybody was in generally the same economic strata. They all young, upwardly mobile husbands, and children, young children. It was the typical Levittown type of community. I was sitting back behind our picture window one Saturday afternoon enjoying a football game. I see another pickup truck drive down the street. And here's this upright piano rocking back and forth. Oh no. Sure enough, it pulls into our driveway. And Annie's right behind it. She hops out, she comes along, wakes me up, gets me out, and said, "Isn't it great? I got this player piano." I said, "Well, what's going to happen to that?" Well, she said, "It doesn't work, but you're going to rebuild it." What I didn't know was that she had met the music teacher at the school where she was now a school nurse, and he was a mechanic who liked to, that was his hobby, of fixing player piano. So he agreed to help me do it. And Annie's grandmother had about 50 of the old piano rolls. You remember those that had the words on them?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you, we had more darn fun with that piano. We had a lot of wonderful parties singing the songs that were contained on those rolls. And that piano followed us across the country and was in several different places.
I'll have to interrupt here and tell you that when we decided to move the piano to California, the mover said, "Oh, you're not going to take that piece of junk." He said, "They're burning those on corners in California." And I said, "Well, it's got to go." And we had to move that. and we were living in an apartment on the 3rd floor. And we had to get that piano, we had no elevator, and it was the most terrible job to get that player piano up the steps. And when the movers finally got it up, they said, "Don't call us to take it down." That was the end.
We've also been asked the question, why would you folks move from eastern Pennsylvania to California? Well, this is a story as well. Annie had decided that she wanted to get back to her chosen profession when our youngest child was 2 years old. And she made arrangements with the wife of the Baptist minister who lived in our community to come in and look after the 2 younger children while Annie was at work and the 2 older children were at school. And it worked out just fine for a while. Well, then one day, Annie was out in the backyard hanging up clothes. You remember the clotheslines you used to have before we had washer and dryers? And one of her neighbors came out to do the same thing. Annie called over to her and greeted her, and for some reason the woman turned around and didn't even respond and went back into her house. Well, the same thing happened a few days later. And Annie said, "What's going on here?" Well, we had some other friends in the neighborhood, one of whom was the wife of one of my college classmates. And Annie went to her to see, well, what have I done wrong? Well, don't you understand? First thing, Mom, you guys bought a second car. You're the only family in here with 2 cars. Plus the fact that you went to work, and this means that you're going to have more money. And these people are going to be unhappy because you moved a step ahead of them. And thirdly, you've got young children and you're working, and we don't approve of that. Well, unfortunately, Annie's mother and her sister were right there with these people. They disagreed with her decision to go back to work. And it created a very uncomfortable kind of situation. We had visited my parents who had moved from New York State to California when my dad retired. And they were very happy living outside of Los Angeles, a little town called La Habra. And we had 2 sets of cousins out there. We had made 3 visits to California. And they say, you know, when you make the 3rd visit, you stay. So we decided to make the change. And as Annie will tell you, we crossed the country in a covered wagon with 4 small children. When we got to California, Annie was able to get a full-time job in a school nursing situation, and was very, very happy, and discovered that people out here accepted the fact that a young mother could be working and make it work. And she received a lot of favorable comment as a result of that. And I'd like to have her tell you a little about experience that she had after she'd been working for a while.
Which one is that?
We're going to talk about how I made money.
Oh, well, anyway, I was still scheming, trying to figure out that we had to make some more money. So I went out and bought this book, How I Made $1 Million in Real Estate with $1,000. I don't know if you remember that book, any of you, but it was a big seller. And I read it from cover to cover. And it said that, well, since I was working, and I figured out I could borrow from the credit union because, you know, that was my lifesaver, a credit union. So it said that you had to start out by buying a duplex or a 5-plex, and then you had to get the owner to carry the paper because you didn't have any credit balance or anything like that, so that you wouldn't be able to get a mortgage. So that's what we did. We looked in the paper, and my friends at work, some of them had invested in real estate, and they got me all jazzed up. And so I started looking, and we found this five units. And it was another teacher and her husband who were much older, and they wanted to get rid of it. So we made a deal with them that they would carry the paper back, and I borrowed the down payment. And so when I went to work, I said, well, we're not going to use your salary. I mean, I have some pride. And so you just go and use your salary to pay off the credit union with these loans you're going to get. Will you tell them what happened at first?
Well, we bought a five-unit apartment building. It was our first venture as landlords. And one of the apartments was vacant, and we knew we had to get that apartment rented right now in order to pay our mortgage. There was a spinster lady living in one of the studio apartments who really took a shine to us. And so we asked her if she would be our watchdog. The property was only 10 blocks away, but still we couldn't sit there and watch it all day long. We were both busy working. Well, one evening, soon after we bought the property, back up. We were able to rent the vacant unit, to two nice girls. We thought they were very nice girls. And we got a phone call, I guess, 3 or 4 days after these girls moved in, from our watchdog, telling us, this was late at night, you better get over here. The balcony is filled with men waiting to get into that apartment where those two nice girls are. Well, what have we done? So we threw some clothes on and drove over there and started to map out our strategy. And as we got out of the car, Annie called out in a loud voice, "The police are coming!" Well, those guys scattered, let me tell you. And we went up to the door, we hammered on the door opened, 2 more men came out, and then the girls came out and disappeared. Well, I'll tell you, that was one of our first many lessons that we learned over the next 40 years of property management. Annie continued her entrepreneurial tendencies, and as some of you may know, we ended up buying a broken down 28-unit motel in Palm Springs. Well, the first 4th of July holiday after we had bought the property, I was sitting in the hot tub, relaxing a little bit, and Annie came running across from where she'd just been across the street, breathlessly. "Quick, give me a check for $10,000. I just bought the property across the street. They can't pay the mortgage, they're desperate, it's a great buy. We've got to do this, we've got to take this opportunity." "Honey, we don't have $10,000. Don't worry about it, I'll find the money." Where's the money come from?
Well, I decided I'd call my father. I did, and I told him, I said, the lady, I said, we have to meet the mortgage. And I said, we need $30,000. And I said, I'm a good investment. And I said, I'll pay you top interest. And I heard this groaning on the phone. He said, where do you think I'm going to get $30,000? I said, well, just sell some securities or stock or something. I said, I'm going to pay you back with top interest. He said, listen here, he said, you've just gone far enough. You're going to kill that husband of yours. And you just got to stop buying real estate. And I'm not going to give you a cent. So the next day, I was sort of cast-fallen. So I went to work, and I had a very nice vice principal. And she was my boss too, so I told her the story. And she said, let me get on the phone. So she called her husband, and she said, my husband says that we've been watching you. We went out with him socially a couple times, and we think that you've really got your head on straight, and we will loan you the $30,000. my co-partner. So, but before we finished, another lady who was invested in this property, she came. So anyway, in the end, we had 3 people that were going to loan us $30,000, which just drove me on to start looking for another. So we got the money, and this had more kitchens, so we ended up with how many kitchens? With a lot of work.
30 kitchens.
30 kitchens. And we both worked full-time. And Doug got a PhD in toilets. He did a lot of help with the laundry. We did all our own work, painting, and we took our children down and made them work too. They painted the outside of the building. It was in terrible shape. It was a real rundown property. We had every drug case and alcoholic and what else is there? And they were all cooking in the room and with hot plates if they didn't have a kitchen. And it was just terrible. And I kept saying, it'll work out, you know. But poor Doug, he was so good. He always gave in to me and helped me, and we ended up, and of course, we sold it in 23 years, and today it's a very successful gay motel. We got a very good price for it because it was really a very fine property. And after we did a lot of work on it, they came in, and so it's well known in Palm Springs.
In 1976, Annie was awarded a sabbatical leave from her school nursing job in Long Beach. And her plan was to spend 4 months traveling alone in the South Pacific. She started out in Hawaii, and then flew to Australia. She spent time in the outback visiting the Aborigine camps. She visited University School for University Food Services in New Zealand. She went to Fiji, lived on a remote island with a public health nurse sleeping on the ground, no running water, no electricity. She went to Tonga, worked in well baby clinics in the jungle, where her lunches were cooked on open fires. She visited both Samoas, visited school nurse programs, school health programs. And then she finished up with 3 weeks in French Polynesia. One of those weeks was spent on Bora Bora living with a Tahitian family who spoke no English. So that was a challenge. So I'd like to ask Annie to tell you about her last night on Moorea.
Well, I was getting ready to go home, and I was awful lonely, and what I did was, I had a tape recorder that was about the size of our book. And I talked into that tape recorder, and I had little tapes, and I sent those tapes, kept mailing those tapes back to Doug so that he knew what was happening. But then these tapes became the basis for the book, because everything was on those tapes. But a lot of them started to break down, so we had to repair some. But this is what we did. And I would tape, and then I could recharge the battery if I could get somewhere where I could plug it in. But it was so big. I mean, now these little tape recorders, you know, where you can just hold in your hand. So my last night on Moorea, I was getting very excited about going home. And I was living in a little hospital in Moorea, and they had put me in the maternity ward because that's where they had a bed, and they said that would be a good place for me to sleep while I worked. So that's what I did. So there was this gorgeous French nurse, and she had long flowing blonde hair and blue eyes, and she was just gorgeous. She had a figure to die for. So it was the doctor. We had 2 French doctors, and they were going off. So I was going to be alone at the hospital with the patients and a caretaker. So she said to me, she said, "Why don't you come home with me, and we'll go out to dinner, and I'll keep you for the night." And I said, "Oh, that'd be lovely of you." I said, "I am awful lonely, and I'm anxious to go home." So she put me in this open top red MG, and if you remember the old MGs, it just had 2 seats. And she said, "We'll go get something to eat, and then I'll take you to my home." And so we started out, but we just drove and drove, and she just drove like a mad woman. Her hair was flying out the back, and we were going so fast, and all of a sudden she pulled up in another house, and this young man came out, and she said, "That's my boyfriend. You'll have to get out of the car, and you'll have to sit on his lap." Oh, well, he was a typical Frenchman, and he wouldn't leave me alone, and I kept slapping him. And I said, "Listen, I'm going home as a virgin, so just cut it out right there." So
Mother of 4.
So he said, "Well, all right." And so I said, "I'm old enough to be your mother." And he said, "Yeah, I know you are." So anyway, we finally got to the restaurant. And then we met other people, the group, and then she drove me back to this desolate house. And there were no lights, and it was dark by then. And we pulled in, and there was a group of people, and the water was coming right up to the porch. And I said, "Where are we?" I mean, it was total. I said, "Why aren't there any lights?" And she said, "Because we didn't pay the electric bill." And so anyway, I said, "Well, where am I going to sleep?" I said, "I don't, how many rooms are here? Where am I going to sleep?" I said, I count 4 women here and some men." And she said, "Well, we're all going to sleep here, and you're going to sleep in my bed." And I said, "Oh," I said, "Well, where are you going to sleep?" "I'm going to sleep in the bed with you." And I thought, oh my, I wonder which way she swings, I was beside myself. So it came, well, she said, "I didn't know you were such a prude when I invited you on this outing." And she said, "I've passed the word that nobody's to touch it." I said, "Well, thank you." So, but what a night that was. I mean, I finally laid down on the bed. I laid on top of the covers, and she said, "I'll be out for a couple hours, and you just go to sleep." Well, I was so nervous, and I was trying to find and when I get nervous, and I have to run to the bathroom all the time. And so I was trying to find the bathroom in the dark, and the rooms weren't to the ceiling, they had open petitions. And I want to tell you, I got an education in sounds that went on all night long, and I was just terrified. So anyway, and so when she finally came to bed, I said, "Well, how am I going to get back to the hospital?" She said, "Don't worry about it." She said, "The postman will wake me up in the morning." And sure enough, he came in and woke her up. He knew the time. There wasn't you couldn't see any clocks or anything. So that was my story. And I got home in one piece.
And he came home after those 4 months.
Oh, I forgot
I
about that.
guarantee you that her husband was very happy to see her. And we had a surprise birthday party for her to celebrate her 50th birthday. So I think that pretty well winds up the stories we want to share with you. We did not order a lot of books because we had no way of knowing what the response would be. We have just a few here for sale, and we can take orders for more, we can get more books, or you can get them on Amazon, and they're listed under my name as the author, Douglas Ritchie, or you can get them through Barnes & Noble. But that's pretty much the story. So again, we want to thank you for coming, and I guess there's still some more champagne back there.